Welcome, everyone. The audio is working in the room. Just want to make sure everybody that's joining online can hear. Yeah, thumbs up from somebody. There it is. Folks can see the slide deck online as well. Yeah. Great, great. Well, again, welcome. It's great to see so many folks here. My name is Jeff Hammerlink. I'm the Associate Director of the School of Computing here at UW, and I'm the Director of the Wyoming Geographic Information Science Center, one of the centers that we have here in the SOC. It's my pleasure to serve as your MC today for the inaugural Geringer Distinguished Lecture in GIS and Public Policy. And so really happy to have so many folks both in the room and online being able to join us for this event. Here's just a little bit of an outline of our program today. Times are approximate, but we'll plan on wrapping up by 1 p.m. today. Understand that some folks may have to leave a little bit early, and of course that's okay as well. But that's sort of our time frame. I just want to start by saying that today we're here to start something new at the intersection of GIS and decision making. Geographic information science and technology, I think, has had an impact on the public policy process really since the early beginnings of GIS. And by early beginnings, I mean really back to the 1960s. Over the last 50 plus years, advances in the development and availability of both geospatial technology and geospatial data has paralleled a growing use of data-driven planning and decision-making models in policymaking at all levels of government. Today, more than ever, successful public policy and related decision-making depends on high-quality data and the technology that communicates its meaning effectively. Before continuing, I'd just like to make some acknowledgements, recognizing that it's rare to be successful embarking on something new without the help of others. And you know, even if you could do it on your own, it will almost always be better with input from a diverse set of colleagues and collaborators. And so really want to acknowledge the University of Wyoming School of Computing, Dr. Gabrielle Allen, our school director, and our SOC administrative staff for really making this event possible, both in terms of fiscal resources and logistical support. So thank you very much for that. Also, the UW Foundation, which has helped us craft a strategy for making an event like this sustainable, and particularly Teddy Friedman. I don't know if Teddy could be here today. Don't see her in the room, but major gift officer for the College of Engineering and Physical Sciences, has really been a great resource from the college and foundation to assist us with this. And then I know we have some folks from the Wyoming Geospatial Professionals Organization, YGO, in the room. YGO has again been great supporters of this idea and providing some initial matching funds to move this forward. And I guess we have some both board members and members in the room. Are there board members in the room? If you're a board member of YGO, would you mind standing up? That's great. Excellent. Thank you for being here. And I'm just going to say, before you all sit down, how about other YGO members? I know there's a lot of folks here that are members of the Wyoming Geospatial Organization. Don't be shy. And if you didn't pay your dues this year, you can still stand. Okay. I figured we could Jason that. On top of that, that's great. And then when we kicked off this idea last fall with UW Giving Day, just want to acknowledge the initial Giving Day contributors to help get us off the ground for this. So please join me in thanking all the folks that have come to contribute. So as I said, we're starting something new today. And in fact, we've been starting a lot of new things in the last few years. You know, just thinking with my WIGIS hat on, here in the last less than 5 years, we added academic curricular programs to part of our mission within the center, launching a new set of credentials really at the height of the pandemic in the fall of 2020. And that process has continued on today with the launching of the new BS degree in GIS and T just this past fall. So that was a major shift for the center after operating really in the kind of research and engagement realm over the previous 20 years. In 2022, the university established a new school of computing, and that has been an exciting adventure over the last couple of years. And really the goal behind the School of Computing is to advance applied computing, digital literacy, technology fluency, and this idea of bringing sort of a computational thinking mindset to not just maybe within the disciplines and areas of study that we might traditionally think of them being a part of, but really trying to infuse that across campus and enable new ways of using technology and innovation in our work and in our learning. So that's been very exciting. And within YGIS, we recognize that this is so exciting that we might like to be a part of it. And so Gabrielle and I started having conversations, almost immediately after the school was established, and last July, YGIS moved into the school, and it's been a really great experience, and I just see the possibilities are endless in terms of where this can take geospatial by really broadening the reach of that. And so a lot of new things, and it's very exciting to be able to do that. And so today we're starting something new, but as we do that, we'd like I would like to acknowledge that students are a really important part of that. And that's really the foundation, and it's really why we're here in the end. And so, as I was talking with Jim before this, we were talking about ways that we could incorporate students into today's program. And so today, we have a few minutes at the start here for an opportunity for some of our students to share a little bit about their experience here, whether it be in an undergrad program or a master's program or a PhD program. And so we have 3 students with us today: Sage, Idiana, and Maggie. And I'd like to, we can just go kind of in this order. I'd like to invite Sage to come up first and share a little bit about her experience and what she's been working on in the geospatial world. So welcome, Sage.
Thanks, Jen. You hear me? So I'm in the School of Computing too, and I'm doing a bachelor's in GIST. So to start open, the question I'm going to pose to you guys today is, what do mule deer, remote sensing, and Wyoming have in common? Well, let's look at that. So this semester I proposed a project to look at habitat health with the detection of, so this semester I looked at a project where I wanted to apply using remote sensing to detect and monitor rangeland habitat. And so it's no secret to all of us that our rangeland is threatened. This is really crucial because a lot of species rely on this habitat, specifically mule deer. Mule deer have been declining due to human impacts and disease impacts, which has allowed a lot of managers to go out there and say, how can we improve this? One of these being improving the access to available foraging lands. So my project was specifically looking at the application of using spectral indices to study and monitor these changes to see, are the management practices we're using to improve rangeland habitat actually working, and what are the biases these spectral indices have? Slide. So the next slide. So my spectral indices I was using, I'm looking at NDVI, which is Normalized Vegetation Index, and SAVI, which is Soil Adjusted Vegetation Index, and I'm trying to see what biases exist. Are they telling the same story? So these are 2 images of the same area. This is a rangeland that had encroaching juniper trees. Juniper trees can use upwards of 35 to 35 gallons of water a day, which is insane. Here in the West, water is very limited. And so the first images, this is 2019, the next one's 2023, and in 2020, the juniper trees were removed. So I'm using different indices to see, is it telling the same story? If managers go out and are trying to apply these indices to images, is it telling the same story of that disturbance? It's really important because if we're pushing for people to use these indices, we want to understand what biases exist. Are they actually telling us, are they detecting these disturbances so we can say removing these trees is beneficial or it's not? We're actually introducing more invasive species to this rangeland. And it's really crucial to ranchers. A lot of ranchers are on this project, the BLM, and we want them to understand that removing these trees might change the landscape visually, but improves it in the long term. And so it's been really interesting to kind of look at that and to start to understand how we can take these mathematical formulas that we're applying to images, and we're now representing them as single values. We're saying this is what the data exists, but if I'm using all these indices, which one's best for rangeland and habitat? So we can really improve that. Do you have any questions? I know it's kind of a short way to present it, like maybe complex topic, but we'll be smart.
I'll ask a quick question. So how did you find GIS?
I think I kind of have a unique way I found GIS. My dad's actually a wildlife biologist, and I was taking classes in high school at a college and Casper Community College, and I got dropped from one of the like basic humanities class I wanted, and they're like, you gotta take another class, and they're like, take this GIS class, and I was like, annoying teenager, and I was like, I don't want to take this. It sounds boring. And then look at me, like a couple years later, like 4 years later, and now I'm majoring in it. But yeah, no, I've got a degree, an associate's degree in it, and then was like, this is really fun. And I was really thought I wanted to do wildlife biology, and the more I was taking wildlife biology classes, the more I realized that GIS is really the forefront in that, especially remote sensing. It's where our future is. We want to improve the land we have left. We have to find innovative ways to understand it and monitor that behavior.
Thank you, Sage. I was gonna, maybe you mentioned that, I may have missed it. What type of remote sensing do you use?
I'm specifically looking at Landsat images, and we're using spectral indices to display this. So this is, I'm sure you're a little bit familiar with it, but it's a mathematical formula that we apply to, let's say, satellite imagery, which is collecting in multiple regions of color wavelengths. And we're allowed to take these basically mathematical formulas and select specific regions of color, display as a single value, which allows us to build these histograms. So the yellow and orange is most likely dense vegetation, and then anything in the purple in this color is probably bare ground. So that allows us to study that behavior over time.
Okay, well, glad to hear you do remote sensing. Of course, LiDAR is another way to look at the habitat, especially if we on or leaf off.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you learn a lot more about the habitat with the variety of remote sensing.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Steve. So I'll ask Aidana to join me on the podium.
Hi everyone, so I'm a PhD student in Geographic technology.
Yeah, that's great, right?
Oh, this okay. So the research that I'm currently doing,
Just use the space bar.
so the research that I'm currently doing is mostly concentrated on the dynamics of thermokarst lakes and their hydrological cycles. The loss of remote sensing data, such as high resolution imageries, for example, nanoscope imagery and ISA2 laser altimetry, enable us to make a more detailed investigation in this field. The overall goal of this research is to analyze the dynamics of thermokarst lakes, which include changes in lake extent, changes in water level, and total volumetric changes and then understand the impacts of Arctic amplification in the study area, which is the Alaska North Slope. And the overall goal is to contribute to a more comprehensive understanding of the evolving hydrological landscape in North American Arctic. So at the present, this project has not reached the final stage. Which like the ultimate goal is to derive total volumetric changes for thermal conflicts in the study area. And for now, I'm trying to develop a method for retrieval of depth points from the ISA2 ATL3 product. So the most challenging aspects of this is first related to ensuring that I'm selecting the granules, the ATL3 granules that have some that contain signals that are originating from the bottom of the lakes, and secondly, designing a method for thermal karst lakes that will identify signals that are associated with underwater features of bathymetry. So, and this, the derivation of this depth points will be the foundation for obtaining information for trip. So hopefully, I will get some robust results by the end of the summer.
Thank you.
Sorry. So forgive my ignorance, what is a thermal karst lake and what information are you trying to, what can they tell you? What else can they, what story are they telling you, I guess, basically?
So thermal karst lakes is actually like a freshwater body that is formed from depression, which is formed by joint of ice-rich permafrost. And recently there were like investigations that are these lakes are actually like more thermal occurs, and the like permafrost is actually kind of it just leads to sometimes to disappearance of those lakes. And what was the second part, or what time?
Oh, it's just is there anything that their presence or disappearance is indicating?
Yes, so I'm looking at the Arctic amplification, which is the like Arctic gets warmer 2 or 3 times faster than the rest of the planet due to the sea ice loss, and we are trying to find so by looking at the dynamics of the lakes, what is happening in the Alaska North Slope.
Right, so much. And maybe.
Hello, everyone. I'm also studying lakes, Tayana. So I'm currently a master's student here in the GIS program. I'm in my. How about now?
Yeah.
We're good now. Okay. I'm in my 2nd year, and I'm going to be talking very briefly about some of my thesis work. So for those of you, probably many in this room, if you've lived in Wyoming the past 5 or 10 years, you've probably noticed a shift in fire activity. It's been getting greater. So since 2000, there's been an increase in fire severity and frequency in Wyoming and in the entire American West. And this can cause a lot of issues that all dealt with, probably air quality issues, infrastructure issues, but my research is mainly focused on issues like water quality. So this is my study area. It's very large. I'm doing the goal of the study is to look at a large scale analysis of wildfire effects on lakes and reservoirs in the Western US using remote sensing data. So in this figure, you can see all these different polygons. They all represent a Huck 8 watershed in my study area. The duration of the study is 1984 to 2020.
The crosshatch polygons, and you can see them up in the Pacific Northwest, those represent watersheds that have not burned within this 36-year timeframe. So you can see a majority of watersheds in the Western US have burned at least once over this duration. And then the gray polygons show watersheds that have not burned this year. And then the other polygons show a percent of that have burned. There's ebbs and flows, there's higher fire years and quieter fire years, but the general trend is that more of these watersheds are burning. So to look at water quality using remote sensing, we're using this data set called LimnoStat. So LimnoStat uses the deepest lake points and derives reflectance data from Landsat imagery. So each point on this map, each point represents a lake that is in my study area. And so for each lake, we have a time series of reflectance values over this 36-year time period. So using the change detection methods, we're trying to find significant breaks within these reflectance values to see if we can find big shifts in lake water. We're also using fire severity data as well as precipitation data at a watershed scale to try to infer if these changes are due to wildfire. So as many of you know, the American West is really large, it's really rural, there's a lot of remote areas. So the hope is that we can utilize remote sensing data to get a better understanding of some of the changes that are happening in areas that we might not be able to access. Thank you.
Most on your time trend. Literally hotspots, right? This, see, stop it right there.
Yeah.
Just tell you what I was thinking, that's interesting. There are areas as it goes over time where it seems to burn out almost every year. And I wondered if you're collecting any hydrologic data to show the effect of hydrologic retention. If you've lost the surface vegetation or a substantial amount of it and the water runs off, you have a lot more erosion. You don't build up that water bank and the hydrologic layer. Just wondered if you're gathering any hydrologic data in some of those areas that have repeat burns.
Yeah, that's a good question. So for each of these lakes, once we find a lake that has a significant break point in the reflectance data, we're going in and grabbing DEMs for that watershed and doing like a runoff analysis to see how much of that watershed is actually contributing like runoff, wildfire runoff to that lake. But we're looking at lakes that do have repeat fires as well. So that's a good thing to note as well, to use maybe some vegetation indices when doing that analysis.
Great, thank you, Maggie. Sorry, Paddington's like, oh, off the.
Hey, Maggie, thanks very much for your talk. How do you know that it's the wildfire that's affecting the quality of the water?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and so that's something that we've discussed a lot about. And so we're also looking at other imageries. We've actually pulled out for one of the lakes. I'll give you an example. We looked at a reservoir that was in California. We noticed that there was a significant break in reflectance, and there was a high severity fire that burned in near proximity. And then when we looked at the Landsat imagery, we saw that there was a lot of sedimentation in the reservoir, and it was actually affecting the reflectance value in that deepest point. So we couldn't 100% say that that change was due to wildfire. So it's the reflectance data is kind of like that initial look, and then we're going in and kind of doing a more in-depth look to make sure that we can attribute it to wildfire.
Sage, Donna, Maggie, really nice work, and thank you all three of you for sharing with us today. That was really great. All right, I will talk fast, but there's a few things I want to say in introducing our speaker today, our keynote speaker today. Last year, recognizing the important role that geospatial technology and methods can play in improving policy development and decision-making, we set out to establish a new annual speaker event that would showcase past and ongoing achievements in this arena. As we began to consider the various ways we might move forward with this idea, we quickly recognized an opportunity to honor Wyoming's own Jim Geringer as the namesake for this new engagement opportunity. I reached out to Jim last fall, and he not only humbly agreed to allow us to associate his name with the event, but he also agreed to be the speaker for the first edition of the Geringer Distinguished Lecture in GIS and Public Policy. It's my pleasure to introduce you today to the Honorable James Edward Geringer. Jim is a Wyoming native, born and raised on a farm in Wheatland. He attended Kansas State University, earning a degree in mechanical engineering. Afterward, he served for 10 years as an active duty officer in the U.S. Air Force, where he worked on a wide range of unmanned space programs, providing launch and satellite control for both NASA and the Department of Defense, and including work that led to the establishment of the GPS satellite constellation. He returned to Wheatland in 1977, working briefly at Basin Electric's Laramie River Power Station before purchasing a farm and building a successful production agriculture business. In 1983, Jim was elected to the Wyoming legislature, serving in both the House and Senate over a 12-year period. As we were talking a little bit ago over coffee, I first met Jim during this time in 1992 or 1993, at the very start of my own GIS career here at UW, where I was helping establish the Water Resources Center GIS lab, and he was a member of the Wyoming legislators, I think Select Water Committee or Select Ag Committee, and that was the first time we had an opportunity to interact with one another. In 1994, Jim was elected as Wyoming's 30th governor, serving 2 4-year terms. I know he'll talk to you about his own introduction to GIS, but I know that I've often shared how much fun it was to have a self-professed technology enthusiast as your governor. Perhaps only in Wyoming in the late 1990s could you hear our governor happily sharing about tracking the route of the state plane using his handheld GPS as he was in the plane flying across the state, or emailing a GIS analyst directly for a map to put in the PowerPoint file that he was doing for his own work. And by the way, I was happy to receive those emails from him. In 2003, Jim joined Redlands, California-based Esri, a global leader in the GIS software industry. And he joined them as Director of Policy and Public Sector Strategies. During this time, among many service contributions to the geospatial community, he served on the Federal Geographic Data Committee's National Geospatial Advisory Council and as an advisor to the Coalition of Geospatial Organizations. Jim retired from Esri in 2018. He currently resides in Cheyenne, Wyoming with his wife, Sherry. And together they have 5 children, 12 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. It was truly humbling to review Jim's background in preparing these remarks. The little bit that I've shared here with you is really just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the many contributions that Jim has made in his career as a champion of STEM education and science-based decision-making, as well as the value of geospatial technologies in society. We're honored to have him here today. Please join me in welcoming Jim Geringer to the podium.
Getting a little concerned there, he was waxing on a little too long.
I knew that.
Just kind of ate into my time, didn't you? Well, I can warn you in advance, this is not gonna be a lightning talk. So, settle in. Well, before I forget where I was, I should go ahead and figure out my. Well, I'll talk about my experiences with GIS, and I'll talk about it from the perspective of the official has to end up making a lot of decisions. It could be a CEO of a company, it could be a dean of a college, it could be any number of areas where somebody has to make the final decision. And what's the best way to make that decision? And it's always fascinated me how people don't always follow a good policy in doing it. By the way, I'll welcome those who are joining you or that are joining us online remotely. We appreciate your participation. If you have follow-up and you can't reach me any other way, Geringer@wyoming.com. That way I can choose to ignore you, but not really. What is GIS? When I first joined Esri, it had a hectic time making the arrangements to get out there, and I went down to the barber shop nearby before heading up to the office one day. It was just close by, and a gentleman that was cutting my hair asked what brought me to town. I said, well, I'm joining ESRI. I never know if it's going to be Esri Environmental Systems Research Institute or what. Esri is the most common way. I said, joining that company. He said, oh, that's that map stuff, isn't it? I thought, you know, that's probably the problem most of us have, like by geo, it's that map. Is it just a map? No, it's a whole lot more. And I hope to explain that a little bit better as we go forward. I'd call attention to, in this particular slide, to the sentence following the introduction, more than a map. It's the integrating science that brings together all the other sciences, and it provides rich content and full context. 3 words there that are important to GIS: integration, content, and context. And that last one, context, is the bulk of what I'll be discussing today. For decision makers, people that get involved in policy, and it's not just government officials, it's anybody that has to deal with these major issues: economic, environmental, social. You could add to that any number of things: health, education. These are the problems that are difficult to solve, not because, well, because they work they don't work as an individual discipline or entity. They're affected by so many other things. So the context is more than just one particular issue. You can narrow it down for research like our lightning talk speakers have done to show specific areas where they're working on. And I'd say parenthetically, one of the more fascinating things about what they presented is, what are the trends over time? How do things change over time? And how does GIS enable that? You have all this imagery that can very quickly show you the difference. Now, how do you provide the analytics to say why? So it's more than just one issue that comes to bear. The science of where to enable the who, what, when, why, and how. Everything you do is somewhere, place-based. Well, just for a little introduction, this is a photograph taken probably 25 years ago from a NASA satellite. It shows North America at night. And the light intensity reflects population density. The power of a picture is when you see something that you wouldn't otherwise notice. Well, some of the things you notice right off the bat is it's kind of empty out here in the West. Compared to back east, especially along the eastern seaboard, you can even find out where different things are. Like there would be Salt Lake City, there's Denver, Cheyenne's about right about there, Laramie just a little bit to the left. But you notice the stark contrast between what's out in the Rocky Mountain area and beyond until you get to California, Oregon, Washington. There's a few more people out there compared to here. So I want you to know that the Society for Keeping Everybody East of the Mississippi has been largely successful. You guys from YGO, you saw that one before, I think. Well, now how about this one? When I first was poking around with some of the state's technology and what might be available, I put the question to the Department of Administration and Information. I said, is there a way that we can display population density around Wyoming? Because that map had kind of tweaked my interest, my curiosity. And so they decided they'd give it a try. And lo and behold, it kind of shows some things you might otherwise miss. You could trace the North Black River just by following that population density like that. If you had the river on the map, be able to trace that, but knowing that, you can say, wow, I can just see where the population kind of tended to concentrate. It was either along the railroad, all the way through Wyoming, the southern tier. They didn't stop much out here, did they? And all the way up into the park, Gillette, Campbell County out there. And how many states can actually show you where each person lives? We have a population density of about 5 people per square mile. New Jersey, 50,000 per square mile. You couldn't put a map together of New Jersey like this one, it'd be a black blob. Well, high altitudes, low altitudes, and great attitudes. Now I want to show you something. You see those 2 dots? Did you even see them? I think, sir.
No, I know the answer.
There's another state can do it.
The happiest couple.
I call that the happiest couple in Wyoming. Well, think about it. If they're not happy, they're living one dot or even none. That's just a way to say the power of a picture to communicate is amazing. And that's what GIS helps enable, the power of a picture to show that otherwise what would be tables and tables of data. And there's a, Jeff, my backpack is over there on the floor in the corner. Would you bring me the book that's behind it? I'll need that in a minute. I forgot to bring it up with me. So GIS is a system that creates, manages, analyzes, and maps all kinds of data. So we integrate location data, where things are, with descriptive information, what things are like there, and how each activity, thank you, is affected or is affecting other things, affected by or does affect. I want to make sure you understand that no matter what data set you have, something around that is influencing that, and it is influencing. It's just like one of the lightning talks presented the impact of energy and habitat. So each can affect the other, and how do you describe that? And especially, how can you show that? I call GIS a governor's information system. And for me, it was a decision maker's dream, and it took a while before it even came to fruition. Well, my checker past was mentioned. I developed a lot of my affection for technology just working with the unmanned space program. My office staff used to take delight in saying, well, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to be governor, but you finish the sentence. Maybe. Connecting people, places, and policy. I'll talk about my experience, how to gather information in context, and how to take a systems approach. Visualization, as I mentioned, is key to context for decision makers and for individuals as well as other activities, and you have to meet even greater public expectations all the time. Information integration is not an option, it's a necessity. The decisions that people need to make today, they need to see it in context. How do you put that context together? The West has always been known for open spaces, wildlife, energy, people. Growth and change were and still are fragmented. They're not approached as partnerships. Western states in particular were concerned about economic, energy, and environmental concerns. How could we deal with that along with subdivision encroachment? Conflicts were there, especially on what's sensitive and what's not. And the people who had jurisdiction over various areas of land always tried to do it themselves. They had their own science, their own data. They weren't too willing to share. That frustrated me. So we needed to develop assessment tools that would take all that into account. I didn't know what GIS was at the time, but facing the problem, I was looking for ways to simplify the decision making. And here's a picture that maybe, I'm sure some of you have seen it, but it's land ownership in the United States. And it tells quite a story about the contrast between the Rocky Mountains on west and what happens in the Midwest and the East. All the discussions about public lands, access to public lands, what gets done on public lands. A lot of those public lands were left over after the Homestead Act because they were lands nobody wanted for agriculture primarily. Then we discovered after the feds decided to retain all these lands, there's gold in them in our hills as well as oil and gas and everything else. But you look at this, there's 9 federal agencies that have jurisdiction, primary jurisdiction over the land. And I qualified that because I want to point out And here's a map that I used probably 25 years ago. I didn't have the best GIS available to me at that time. But it shows that there's this intermingling of ownership of the surface, but there's other things that go on there. There's land impact, water impact, species, minerals. And in the case of this, the yellow lines that are represented by BLM doesn't have primacy for air and water, the state does. Well, how do we get along? And I got rather tired. The reason I had Jeff bring this up was these land managers would call my scheduler, Christie, and say, we'd like to visit with the governor. And she'd say, well, what do you want to talk to him? Well, we want to update him on what we're doing. And how they would update me, they'd drop one of these off. Now, how am I going to have time to read this? Well, somebody else is going to have to read it if I don't, because there's things in here that I need to know. Or if I actually did browse through it and I came across something I wanted to refer back to later, I couldn't find it. Because none of these were submitted in digital form or in paper bound. And some of the biggest decisions that we had to make were driven by paper that most people hadn't read once they published it. I got tired of being updated. I wanted to be partnered. Yeah. Well, here's that same kind of a map, and it shows not only the federal agencies, but also the state ones as well. You notice the blue dots going across the state. Those are the school sections, the Wyoming trust lands. Federal government determined that sections 16 and 36 of every township should be dedicated to the funding of the public schools. They don't really fund our schools in Wyoming, but they are lands that are currently considered to be just that, trust. Now, what do we do with it? The state still does not have a complete plan of what to do with these trust lands. But it shows the checkerboard patterns of anything that goes on in the state. In particular, how do we share that information when we engage in activities that across the boundaries of several jurisdictions? When I asked some of the federal agencies why they didn't share that data with each other and display it in ways that we could all understand, they said, well, we don't have a common base map. Have you ever heard that? Those of you here from IGO and GIS, how do you put imagery on a map? How do you put data points on a map? What kind of descriptors do you have to say that what I say is at that point is really at that point in reality compared to what's on the map? Scale. There's the factors that determine what is an accurate representation of something going on in a place. That's why GIS has become so important to a lot of GIS activity. You have to know where something has happened. Down to the, let's see, agriculture now can get within 2.5 centimeters. That's about 1 inch. And back when I was working on the ballistic missile side of the space program, that's extremely accurate when you're launching a warhead in the ever do. You can get those within 10 feet, but we do things in GIS for totally different peacekeeping purposes. You want to know the accuracy of where that's located, especially with that pattern down in the lower left corner. That's that picture I just showed you. Now you have oil and gas that have split ownership, surface and subsurface. Same way with coal bed, methane, and coal. The federal government retains the rights to 70% of all oil and gas minerals and 90% of the rights to all coal and coal bed methane, while somebody else owns the surface, or maybe the state has part of that surface, or maybe someone else has retained ownership of the minerals. A lot of conflicts arise out of that when you do any kind of, development. So what was missing? The big picture, partnerships. People needed to be willing to work together. Agencies were very selfish with their data. They didn't want to share it because they thought they would lose control. Well, this isn't about control. It's doing something for the common good. We had to discover how we needed to do something that was more than just talking for mutual benefit. Integration. Well, earlier when we were talking, Gabrielle mentioned having been invited to dinner after an activity that she had engaged in. I came up with the observation that quite often at social gatherings, if you're at a friend's house with other people, maybe heavy hors d'oeuvres, and maybe a glass of wine or beer or something like that, maybe not, but where people always gravitate in the kitchen. What is it about that relaxing place that you feel comfortable, you feel even trusting? I tried to create that kind of an ambiance by inviting federal and state agencies and even adjacent states to what I referred to as the governor's kitchen table. No, we didn't serve food, we had break time and things like that. But the idea was, can we create a culture of cooperation and trust? The individuals that worked on the ground were very willing to do that. As you work your way up the chain, less and less. People want to hold on to what they can control rather than share it. But we were able to start data sharing agreements that finally led to an enterprise approach. And GIS was the key as to how that was justified. That wasn't the table, but that gives you the idea. 1977, the state enacted statute says we need to know who has the right to use what water, where, and how much, and the relative priority. The priority of water rights in Wyoming is the most important part of Western water law, and particularly Wyoming. Wyoming was the first to develop the prior use concept. And in 77, because of that legislation, they filed a complaint against the federal government to adjudicate all the water rights in Water Division 3. We have 4 water divisions in Wyoming. Division 3 includes the Wind River Indian Reservation, the Northern Arapaho and Eastern Shoshone. They had rights that were called reserved rights. Reserved means that these rights were reserved by the federal government and the Bureau of Indian Affairs prior to Wyoming having established statehood. So Wyoming's water right claims would follow once we had statehood, but anything prior to that was reserved. And the federal government had never described those rights by quantity or right or priority date. So that was initiated, and it took 8 years. And finally, when GIS was brought into the courtroom for final settlement, it made the difference. And then because of that engagement and starting to use GIS by, let's see, was it 96, Jeff, that YGIS came into being? Well, YGIS in 2001, but the precursor to that was back in 1996. And that's about the time I was first introduced to GIS by Nancy McCann in the state engineer's office. She told me about the water rights adjudication for reserved rights. YGIS, YGO, I think I've been affiliated in one way or another with all the Wyoming versions of GIS, and I appreciate that. So data is the foundation, visualization is how you communicate. The Wyoming Student Atlas, was that the first parcel map that YGIS participated in?
Might have been.
No, it was put together by students, and that's why I compliment those of you who are doing this today as students. It's a great way to learn the technology and the philosophy behind GIS. Maybe not always the technology, but learning how to use it and how to incorporate it into your decision making. Campbell County and Gillette started to use GIS when they needed to develop a new water supply. They used GIS not only to plan, but to coordinate the construction. They brought it in under cost and 18 months early. And they attributed the success of that to better management by using GIS. The City of Cheyenne and Laramie County jointly operate a GIS system for all wide variety of things, not only greenways and address finders, but also determining hotspots for crime within Laramie County and Cheyenne. It was always my dream that we would connect everybody in Wyoming to everybody else, one way or the other. And I could see the potential of the internet doing that in Wyoming. We had almost no internet in Wyoming. My first experience with internet was a, 28K modem connected to a telephone line. Can you imagine a GIS presentation transmitted from Cheyenne to Redlands? Comment on that. I had proposed in 2003 that the state should make some of its remote offices anchor tenants on a core network of high-speed connectivity, and then everybody else could tap in. The state agencies could be the core tenants, and the community colleges and university were included in that. And then public and private could have access to a huge pipe, 100 gigabit network to fuel the economic boom. I don't know if the boom actually came about, but we are certainly better connected than ever before. And it took 10 years from when I first proposed it. If you want to know what your internet availability is, you're either served or underserved or not served. And you can go online. The little gray colored blocks that are on here show the level of service, whether it's 100 megabits per second or 25. If it's 100, you're served. If it's 25, you're underserved. If you're below 25, you're not served by the definition. It's just a way to illustrate how GIS is being used in so many different places. Sometimes it's easier to explain about GIS when you say there's all these sets of data that once they're reconciled to a place, they can be viewed as intermingled and determine the impact that one has on the other. So that's the purpose for showing it as a layering. Each one, and you can bring those layers in one at a time and begin to see things you wouldn't see any other way. Data is strategic, as Jeff has already mentioned. There you can use all kinds of data. It can be real time. It can be, as you noticed in some of the talks, it's imagery that's been out there for some time. There's Landsat. There's a variety of other remote sensing data that's available. The interconnectedness of things. Everything you do is somewhere and affects something else. I would kind of describe it this way. You start with the data. You do the visualization and mapping, the analytics and the modeling. Plan and design for what you would like it to be, make a decision, and then measure whether or not you accomplished what you intended to do. In my experience, where does the senior policymaker come in? Right about there. So all the work that goes on before that is going to substantiate the various options that you have. I can't tell you how many times I have asked, or someone has asked me when I've made presentations, they'll say, what are my options? They don't want you to recommend one thing. They want you to say, here are the options. Because those decision makers have to add one thing that the techies and the data gatherers don't add, and that's values. The elected officials, CEOs of company, in the final analysis with all the science in place, you're going to make a decision based on your values of who you represent, the company you represent, the state you represent. So from spatial data to decisions, integration, visualization, storytelling, there has to be that going with it, decision making. What happened and why did it happen? What is happening and why is it happening? What's likely to happen? The predictive analytics, and what do you do about it? I'm going to go quickly through the representation of how GIS is used in a variety of ways, from environmental monitoring and assessment. There's a lot of that goes on in Wyoming. I use this to illustrate that while GIS is often viewed as a natural resource activity or an environmental activity, it affects or can affect every possible discipline profession out there. Planning for the future, land development. GIS is typically viewed as a two-dimensional map, and more we're viewing it as three-dimensional and even four, because trend over time makes a big difference, as you noticed with the sequential slides that were presented earlier. Business management, economic development. Let's see. Oh, insurance, that's the one I was going to bring up here. I think you've heard some of the discussion about insurers who are refusing to cover homeowner insurance and even car insurance. They're using GIS, they're doing risk analysis, and the reinsurers are driving them to it. The reinsurers are the ones that back up the insurance companies when the claims are catastrophic. The reinsurers are saying, we ain't going to cover this anymore. You better change what you're doing or we're out of here. That's quite a challenge. Well, what did we learn from that? How do you minimize risk? How are you going to change it to where you can still get insurance on your home or your car? You've got to have analytics, and it's got to be based on data. What do you need? GIS. Forestry, agriculture, land management, invasive species, both in plants and vegetation as well as fish. We've got a number of invasive species in the West that are being dealt with. Forest health. We saw the descriptor earlier of the trends burned areas and the impact it has, even offshore, both for aquaculture and for wind development. It's the impact of that, health, demographics, statistics. I guess I'd call attention to the upper right corner, opioid addiction. GIS has been very effective in identifying not only where there are hotspots of opioid addiction, but what are the demographics. And the 18-year-olds are among the highest abusers of opioids. And then you notice it says opioid prescriptions. There's a lot of prescriptions that are illegally written. And you can even find the correlation between who's writing the prescriptions and where the hotspots are for addiction. Just another example. I mentioned health. The CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, had this comment: the places of our lives affect the quality of our health. In fact, with Hippocrates, he said the same thing: where people live and the environments around them impacts their health. What are the social determinants of health? Education and access. Are they educated? Do they have access to education? What about economic stability? Are there jobs available? Are those jobs changing? Neighborhoods in the built environment. Social and community context. What are the healthcare facilities? What are the drive times? Where is primary care located to the people who need it the most? What are the vulnerable populations that are underserved simply because they don't have transportation? 80% of health outcomes are in that context. Transportation planning and management. I'll go quickly through these. Buildings, campus management. I'll give a shout out to Wendy and her team. We're developing UW Enterprise GIS within YGIS. Wendy Burleson and Sean are working with Robert Kirkwood and Kurt Shuffler on the IT center on campus to decide what needs to be managed. And here's an illustration: utilization of spaces and how they are assigned, and their usage, whether it be a classroom, an office space, a lab, whatever, and where the labs are located. There's never enough lab space in some people's minds. But when they had a team of students go out and ask if they could see the lab, and they took pictures, what did they find out? Some labs are not labs, they're storage space. Oh, well, then they ought to be reallocated, but give it to somebody that can use it. You know, there's little things like that you can discover. Try to stay out of trouble by confronting a tree on campus, and you have every tree and bush categorized and located thereabouts. Wow. You can see the height, the quality, the age, the type of tree. If you're curious, it's online. YGIS also does volunteer work with projects such as the Pilot Hill park here in Laramie. Not only where it is, where the trails are, but what features are along the trail, the details that are there. So it's just a shout out as to the types of things. The biggest user overall of GIS software is probably the Department of Defense and the intelligence agencies. Extraordinary amount of information that has to be processed. They are as big a data generator as anybody, and they have to have a way to process it almost instantaneously, especially with an operation that's underway. So that's just another illustration of where GIS is used. Public safety, even the training of firefighters and what the demographics are of who they have and what the trends are, because you have to always be training your next generation of people stepping into these positions. Disaster prep and response. Not every agency has a disaster preparation plan, a disaster plan, a response plan. You don't get it off the shelf when you have to respond to a disaster. You should have written it, you should have talked about it, you should have done dry runs, you should have done practices, because you're not going to know what to do if the first time you use it is at a disaster. And one of the major things that I ran into as a governor briefing others, or post-governor, was who's in charge. Who is the on-scene commander? At school shooting down in Florida, the police chief said, well, I didn't know I was in charge. Well, he must have flunked his training class, because we emphasize the first chief of police or the first chief of fire that shows up on the scene is automatically on-scene commander. And if you haven't worked out those agreements in advance, you haven't prepared well. Disaster response entities, the first responders, need to talk over these protocols ahead of time, or you'll have a bigger disaster as a result. Well thought through plans that are well vetted at practice save lives, they save resources. Energy resources, I think we've all heard about them. just has a decision support tool to decide what can go on, what will impact all these areas, cultural, energy, environmental, wildlife, the like. This one is sage-grouse Lex, where the endangered sage-grouse is and what the state's plan is to recover them. Those little squiggly lines outline basically herds. That's what a lek is, a flock, I don't know what to call it. It's where the sage-grouse live, and they tend to wander all over the place, even where we want to develop energy. Let's see, this is wind availability in Wyoming. Every one of those polygons, not even a polygon, a traced area, if you will, the productivity of the winds. Well, if you have a wind generator, you got to send the electricity somewhere on something. How about a power line? Well, where are the power lines located? There aren't very many. They're located in the prime areas of wind generation in Wyoming. If we're going to get more heavily into wind, you got to have power lines to carry it out. California and Arizona really would like to get to that, but they're going to have to do environmental impact statements that typically take anywhere from 2 to 5 years, but in one power line. That's where you really need cooperative information, and GIS is the one that provides it. Or you can use an overlay that Jeff's group has, even help the city of Laramie plan workforce availability for any new economic activity coming in. Public engagement and collaboration, it's really important to involve the public whenever and wherever you can. By social media, they can contribute. By observation, they can contribute, and they feel like they're part of it and part of the solution. The GeoHub Pathfinder, Wyoming statewide open data set. It's data that anybody can download and use for any purpose that they have in mind. The Biodiversity Citizen Science Initiative is also that same type of thing to engage. And I'll kind of wrap it up with these. Education, how do we build the next generation, and how much can GIS play a role in the public schools? Well, not only in public schools, but higher education. One example is, did any of you see the PBS program, Glaciers of the Winds? The glaciers, the Dinwiddie Glacier up in Fremont County. Winds, that's the Wind River. Jackie Clancher has used GIS to help her students not only map it to learn, but map it to determine what the effect of climate change has had on the receding glaciers and what that affects everything from agriculture to public availability of water. The 21st Century Service Corps helps students work, serve, learn, and play. Red Canyon Ranch is one example. STEM and higher education, there's quite a few courses now, along with degree programs that incorporate GIS. They're not a GIS degree, but almost every major on campus can benefit to an awareness of what GIS can do to help guide and plan and make decisions in whatever discipline you happen to be in. So 5 reasons why GIS is important to education. The first 2 are probably the best: problem solving and critical thinking, and how to use technology for good. I've often made the comment to budget planners. I say, if you carry technology as a separate line item in your budget, you don't know how to use it. Technology should be brought in after you know what you're doing. Now, how can technology help that? And then we all have to talk about AI, artificial intelligence. Esri is integrating AI into analytics for any number of things. Almost every application of GIS, they have already developed pre-trained models. What is pre-training? Well, it's exposing these models to the sources of data that you need to assimilate. I think the term for that is heuristic learning, H-E-U-R, heuristic. Heuristic is usually only applied to human thought, where you have to assimilate things into a conclusion that you're otherwise incapable of doing. But it takes a huge amount of data to do that, and then you have to train these models on how to do it, or you get some of the weirdness. AI has come up with, well, a friend of mine asked Bard, I think it was, one of the programs that's out there. He says, "Are you going to hurt me?" And the bard character, whoever it is, says, no, I would never hurt you. I digress. GeoAI is in 3 primary areas right now. I'd say the heaviest use is in image classification. You have so much imagery to process, human beings can't do it all. How can you do it and extract the data that you need in a meaningful way? It really speeds up how quickly you can process remote sensing data or anything else that is derived from an image. It could be a drone, it could be an airplane, it could be satellite. And then what the clusters are. Clusters tell you a lot about what's happening at a place that has something in common with something else. And then the predictive side of things, that's where AI is not real well trained yet, because it can come up with some wild predictions. So you always have to have a human intervention to say, does this pass the logic test? Well, I'd say every discipline and major at UW can benefit from knowing how GIS is used. You don't have to be a techie. You don't have to know how to write a program for GIS. You just need to know what it can do for you and let others do the hard stuff. Patterns, root causes. You need people who think broadly, how to think in integrated whole systems, how to ask the big questions. That's the most effective tool you can utilize and develop for yourself, is how to ask good questions. Because if you're talking to someone and you make a statement, you're asserting your knowledge to them. If you're asking a question of someone, you're saying, I would like to know what you think. And that's one of the best ways to gain cooperation from other people that you need to work with. Ask them questions, because you're asking them to impart knowledge by the way you ask them. And to separate the trivial from the important. Maybe a different way to put that is how to separate the conspiracies from the facts. I digress again. That's my story. I appreciate it. Thank you. So it wasn't.
Thank you. Hello. Good. There we go. Thank you so much for your remarks. Really thought-provoking and gives us a lot to think about as we move forward with some of the things we want to do here with this program. I'm sure there's some questions in the audience, and we do have about 5 minutes. So.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Governor Geringer. Very good to see you again.
Yes.
So, question for you, knowing where we are in the state as far as GIS, if you had it to do all over again in your term as governor, what would you do differently?
I don't know. I guess the first thing is, how do you anticipate introducing someone to GIS? In my case, I was a legislator when Nancy McCann well, I don't know why he knows water law as well as he does, but I do, and I'm not an attorney. I was fascinated by it. So George Christopoulos would always bring any amendments he wanted in the legislature to me. And Nancy thought, GIS has potential way beyond water. Maybe I'll go after Jim. I'd say, how would you facilitate introducing that to key people in the state and not just in government? Obviously, there's a lot of use that can be made of GIS in government, but also business people. And well, like a lot of the underground mineral developments here, the underground boring, the directional drilling, that's guided by GIS. Well, have them come in and talk to some of your civic groups, introduce them to what GIS has done with this whole range of things. So the variety of GIS, I think the dominant impression is GIS is only geography and environment. It's way beyond that. It's everything that we do. So I'd say work through local service organizations to get guest speakers to come in, including maybe the governor from time to time. But you got to get to the governor. And how do you get the governor's attention? By the key staffer. You don't bring things directly to a governor in almost any state. You have to start somewhere. And you'll get in a lot quicker if you bring that person along with you, because then when the governor says, what do you think about this? And that staffer says, I never saw it before. You might as well back up and leave. Know who key people are that can influence the decision makers. That would be what I would work to do. And then the other thing, I always brought individuals from our various state agencies in, younger people, that we can have serve as interns in the governor's office to introduce them into broad-based thinking. Because those are the people then with experience and additional knowledge are gonna move into leadership. You're gonna build this over time. That's what I would do differently. I started some of that, but I didn't carry it through enough to build emerging leadership and people who would eventually take over, because then you sustain it. It's not a one-time happening.
Along those lines, when you were governor, how often in that with the big swooping arrow that talked about the process of GIS beginning to the decision makers, how often was your office directing like, hey, I've heard a problem, I'd like you to look into this, versus like the state government or citizens were organically kind of starting that process without your knowledge, and then it was ending up for you to make a decision?
Well, it starts with goals. If the governor has no goals, you'll never know where you're going. You always need to be aware of what you're trying to do, now measure and see if you did it. I'm not sure where to start on that. I'd say it's just engaging as many people as you can. The best way to engage people in a sustaining way is to take on projects that have shorter term results. You want to build confidence, and you want to give people the impression that they participated. In the end, it's not the governor did this, it's the people that worked on that whole project that say, and we did it ourselves. When people think they're part of a group that is responsible for having done a good thing, they want to stay engaged, they want to tell other people about it. When we're only focused on giving credit to one organization or one individual, it's not going to sustain it. So as you start the whole process, the leader is not going to know where to start. The leader typically should define the end that you want. And in my office, I always refer to the crisis du jour. There's always something that came up on any given day that was a crisis that had to just get on. And sometimes they were trivial, sometimes they were huge. You know, the flood in KC is an example. Well, we got to do something pretty quick. What do? Well, did people have a disaster prep plan? Well, you learn from that one to say, what should they have done before this flood showed up? Did they engage in planning for disaster? Did they get to identify the data they would need? Did they have terrain and map modeling? Did they know where people were in the floodplain? Did they know how to respond with that few population? I mean, when I went up and toured it, there had been a mobile home on this side that wash. And after the flood went through, the mobile home was over here. It was pretty well intact, but the guy's still going to have to relocate it. In other words, planning, anticipating, knowing what you want to accomplish. If you've got a problem, there must be a solution. If you don't have a solution for that problem, it may come back again, or you're prepared for the next one. People don't learn to plan.
I would love to keep the dialogue going, but we're at the top of the hour and we're gonna have to bring this to a close.
I'll talk to you separately.
And there will be some time here at the end after we've closed off the Zoom presentation. Just wanted to thank you just a little bit for being with us today. This is a very rare coffee mug. You only get one of these if you have achieved a degree in the GIST program. So it's not exactly like an honorary degree. We'll bring you back for that someday. But this is a very rare group of folks that actually have this to drink their beverage of choice. So complete with latitude, longitude for the Geographic Information Science Center. And then we know we also took you away from Sherry today, and I know you spent time really being a support person for her, and so some flowers for her that you can bring back at the end of your day today.
That's
so
great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Probably give them this to.
Yeah.
What is the coffee shop called? Coffee shop.